Bristol has been conspicuous by its absence in the Premier League. Neither City nor Rovers have had the prowess to reach the top level yet, but, and this might be a shock to some people, football did exist before 1992, and today we're here to discuss Bristolian football in the top flight. And since Rovers have never made it there, you better believe this is the story of Alan Dick's years at Bristol City. Got a couple of great Bristol City books for you today, so if you're of a Robins persuasion, check out these by Edward Giles on the 60s and David Woods from the 70s onwards. Bristol City were founded in 1894 and were relatively quick to enter their golden age, moving into Ashton Gate by 1904 and embarking on a bright but brief 5 years in the top division after promotion in 06. Nicknamed the Bristol Babes due to their league virginity, the Robins weren't shy in fluttering up to the top of the table, but ultimately they fell short of Newcastle United in their first ever top flight season, thanks to that pesky leveller known as Easter football. 2 years they were at the showpiece event of the footballing calendar, making it to Crystal Palace on April 24th, 1909. It all began with a limp draw at home to Southampton in January, but via Bury, Norwich and Glossop as well as Derby County, Bristol City had made it to the FA Cup final. Waiting for them was a team called Manchester United, who had come up to the top flight in the same season they had done. They might have won their first league title the prior year, but they had finished a full 5 places beneath the Robins in the league in this campaign. Ultimately, the great sliding doors moment of Bristol City and Manchester United's history saw Sandy Turnbull's goal change everything. United won the cup, became arguably the biggest team in British football, and Bristol City decidedly didn't. When City went down in 1911 as United celebrated their second title, they didn't know it yet, but they'd have to wait a literal lifetime to be back. War stopped the decline all the way into the third tier, but it couldn't be postponed for much longer as the Robins crashed down there in the interwar years. It could be said that the Second World War came at the wrong time, as City were only a point off promotion in 1938, when football was about to be paused. It wasn't the goals of Don Clark or Len Townsend that eventually got City promoted in 1955, but the almighty John Atyeo, who ended up scoring a quite frankly mental 314 league goals for the Robins. This though for a club that only enjoyed the fruits of his labour after he retired. He'd helped take them up again to Division 2 in 1965 before retiring the year afterward. This time Bristol City held their nerve in the second division, first almost blindly going straight up in 5th before settling in for the bottom half grind for the remainder of the 60s. But they had already gotten their saviour in the building long before the 70s were in. You see, after Fred Ford left the club for the high crime of refusing to spend money on new players, Bristol City needed a new manager, who they turned to next gave them their way back to relevancy. Some random blowing from Coventry by the name of Alan Dicks was announced as Bristol City's manager in October 1967. Time would tell us, as Jimmy Hill's assistant at Highfield Road, he had helped lay the foundations of a 30-year stay in the top flight for Coventry City. Bristol City would be chuffed with a quarter of that. Helped by a decent goal tally from John Galley, the Robins staved off relegation back to the third tier in 1967-68. Also, they were able to replicate their best finish in the FA Cup since the 1909 final, when they went down to Leeds United in the 5th round. The record books would go on to show a 3-place improvement in Dick's first full season as gaffer, but in truth, they only did pull away from relegation in the final straight, losing 2 of their final 9 fixtures. Unlike his predecessor, Alan Dicks wasn't shy in spending money, but he did so measuredly, as seen in a £10,000 purchase of Hartlepool's Brian Drysdale. The left-back would go on to make over 300 appearances for the Robins. Then you had young talent like Jerry Gow and Trevor Tainton, who Dicks began to trust more and more in midfield, with those two making over 1,000 Bristol City games between them. Ultimately, it would be another season in the doldrums of the bottom half of the second division, with injuries very much taking their toll. Their survival this time could be counted on thanks to a fantastic middle portion of the season, where teams like Norwich, Charlton and Blackburn were comprehensively thrashed. Entering the 1970s, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the misery of balancing relegation to the third tier and relevancy in an increasingly moneyed game was sweeping through Ashton Gate as they faltered back down to 19th. But there was still one shining light, and it was called the League Cup. The first inkling that they were about to do something was in a fourth round tie at notorious Cup team Leicester, which generated a draw. In the replay they saw the one-time League Cup champions before they produced a carbon copy against Fulham in the quarter-final. A gritty away performance before sneaking the win back in front of their own fans. The semi-final they already knew would be played over 2 games, and the intensity was stepped up a notch when Spurs came to town. In the 2 weeks over Christmas, the Robins gave them a hell of a time, drawing the Ashton Gate leg before taking them to the pits of extra time at White Hart Lane. Ultimately though, City wouldn't have enough. This is where the Alan Dicks run probably should have ended. The club was selling players to pay for a new stand, there was little money in the pot and no signs of progression. Or so it seemed. Jerry Sweeney was acquired from Morton for 22k in a rare splurge again, proving to be a bargain in the fullness of time, given his 500 plus appearances for the club. And with that they finally broke out of their shackles to finish within the top 8. It sounds good on paper, but the feeling was one of disappointment, after their sagging mid-season form had really thwarted what could have been a promotion push. Alan Dicks had already taken the temperature. There was David Rogers to come back after a year out with a knee injury at centre-half, and with his backline and midfield sorted, 70 grand was spunked on Bobby Gould. They improved short of 5th place, but in the final campaign of 2 up, 2 down, the Robins had no chance of catching the pair of Burnley and QPR, who had romped to the top 2 berths. 2 wins in the first 11 games ultimately did for City. That financial recklessness, at least on the manager's part, proved an outlier as Dicks cashed in his chips, selling Bobby Gould for a profit to West Ham and replacing him with a 21-year-old called Paul Cheesley, as Jimmy Mann followed in from midfield from Leeds. And speaking of Leeds,
my foot out in front of Norman Hunter, and I mean the rest is history. And a long joint.
And he's got Toshek in the middle. There's the little tip to Don Toshek. Toshek, yes! Toshek has scored.
Alright, the 1973-74 season wasn't all it was advertised to be as Bristol City returned to the slums of 16th, but they did get themselves in front of a national audience when beating Leeds United at Elland Road before giving Liverpool a game in the FA Cup, both in the latter rounds. It has been their best cup run since 1909 that was supposed to propel Bristol City up the division, but by the time November swung around, they were in familiar dull surroundings, mid-table with only 11 goals scored and 4 matches won from 13 fixtures, things looking grim again. Then the second-tier scalp of Manchester United was taken a few weeks into November, and by the time of a trip to Sunderland in the penultimate game, Bristol City even had a chance at a potential promotion, thanks to the now 3 places up for grabs.
It's there! Robson. That's a goal! And almost another own goal of Melvin has scored.
Behind the promoted trio of Manchester United, Aston Villa and Norwich City, Sunderland and Bristol City would narrowly miss out, but that game and their form would be instructive for how the subsequent season would pan out. Not that you could tell the bookies, who were offering 20-1 odds for the Robins to go up. In utilising both Tom Ritchie and Paul Cheesley up front, Alan Dicks had slotted his jigsaw into place ahead of the 1975-76 campaign.
Ritchie. Oh, Ritchie in on Crawford. Number 2. Last season. In some way to costing Bristol promotion. Here's Ritchie now. And making the most.
The profligacy of before had vanished with the likes of Oxford, Oldham, York and York again all slapped for 4 before Christmas. Housed in the promotion places as 1975 became 76, Dicks turned pragmatic. Going out of the Cup to Coventry at the 3rd round, for example, not an issue, nor were the now binary looking scores as winter became spring. After they had faltered in Easter last time round, Dicks was even able to use that early Cup elimination to his advantage, bringing this laugh-a-minute game with Plymouth forward to January in order to ease the congestion come the crunch. And when it came to the crunch...
Oh my word! Are we back to the crunch?
The crunch.
Oh,
what are you
here
going to
we
do?
fucking go!
Bristol City were top of the league with 5 April games to play. They'd played more than anybody but clung on to a 5-point advantage. 1 win from 5 sounds fatal, but with 2 of those being draws in a 2-point for a win world, it meant the Robins were up. This in the face of supporters being asked to advance their season ticket payments to ward off the threat of financial embarrassment with the bank. And it was that 1 win, a 1-0 triumph over Portsmouth, that sealed the Robins' passage belatedly back to the top flight after well over 60 years away. Having warmed up via the medium of the Anglo-Scottish Cup, Bristol City were hardly eased back into the top flight, were they?
Ritchie recovering and finding Whiteley. Another nice little cross by him. Oh, no doubt about that one from Cheesley.
Let's not kid ourselves, this wasn't the double-winning team Arsenal had at the start of the decade, but they were still a big name and were about to become a mainstay at Wembley again, and Bristol City had just beaten them on a level playing field and away from home. This was no fluke, as the Robins not only held teams like Stoke and Newcastle at arm's length in draws, but stuck 4 past Sunderland. It's a bit of a piss take to put this table up here, but when else am I going to tell you that they were so high in the league standings? Their next run of form would tell you that.
Steps forward. And score.
If the honeymoon period was over with losses at Main Road and Goodison Park, it certainly was after 5 more defeats on the spin left Robins' wings clipped entering November. Dicks grew in the transfer market though, acquiring Norman Hunter, yes, Norman Hunter, for defence for just 40 grand before Chris Garland returned for 100k in the final weeks of 1976. Results at Spurs and at home to Norwich had given them respite, but nonetheless, they entered 77 in the drop zone. This was a team though that played up for the big teams. The double achieved over Arsenal in January, Manchester City's title challenge taking a knock in February before one-time dark horses for a title tilt QPR were dispatched in March. However, there were the only wins of the first 3 months of 1977.
This is in for Gibbons. Knock back for Martin Peters. Good shot!
There wasn't much consistency, but in grinding out valuable draws against Derby, Leicester, Villa and Stoke well into April, it meant that there was an outside chance of survival, even if it didn't look that way as the club entered May bottom of the division, albeit with games in hand. To say the fixture list wasn't kind to Bristol City, bit of an understatement that. Manchester United, Leeds United and Liverpool all visitors to Ashton Gate in May ahead of May 19th and if City still had some fight in them, a potential relegation decider at Highfield Road. The point at home to United, invaluable, both against Leeds even better. The Robins escaped Middlesbrough with a point before Liverpool turned up, and City could be thankful that they'd sewn up the Championship and other things to worry about as they attempted to win an unprecedented treble. Therefore, when Chris Garland bagged twice, there wasn't much fight in Liverpool ranks, given trips to Wembley and Rome to come in subsequent 9 days. With those 6 points from 4 games, City now travelled to Coventry with a chance, and they were now above the dotted line. A frozen pitch had dragged this game into the season's overtime. Would City be blessed with scheduling luck again? Spurs were down, Stoke needed a mathematical miracle to stay up, and the Robins pitched up at Highfield Road, needing just a point, their opponents needing 2, with Sunderland not out of it just yet.
But 29 unbroken seasons in the top flight have seen plenty of hairy moments. In 1977...
Awful moments for City now. 2-0 down, a result, but the Bristol side were fighting, and almost immediately, Donny Gillies there, headed down, and Jerry Giles reached it home.
News of Sunderland's defeat at Everton was flashed onto the scoreboard by Jimmy Hill. The two sides played out a tame draw.
Sunderland, you see, had lost, and that meant the 2-2 draw made Coventry and City safe with minutes.
They called it the Great Escape, and for the results on the pitch and Bristol City's situation, it certainly was. Morally, for what transpired on the final day, slightly questionable. The Robins were doing their bit, drawing 2-2. Coventry still needed a win until the electronic scoreboard, mid-match, told them that they didn't. Sunderland had lost, a point would do for the remaining minutes. A mini disgrace of hee-haw played out. Both teams took a point and the Black Cats perished. Bristol City had made a blistering start to the first season back, probably because of their warm-up in the Anglo-Scottish Cup. This time it was no mere warm-up, safely through from the groups before a stunning fight back against Partick Thistle in the quarter-final and a 5-star performance against Hibs in the semis. Before in November and December's two-legged final against St Mirren, Bristol City could boast they had beaten Alex Ferguson in a cup final, before that could genuinely be accepted as a monumental achievement. Between the two legs was the epitome of Bristol City's ambition now. Joe Royle scoring all 4 goals in a 4-1 win against Middlesbrough on his debut. It dragged the club out of the relegation places, and in the midst of an unbeaten spell as well as lifting silverware, City were able to enjoy the season, in the league at least, after bowing out to third-tier Wrexham in both cup competitions.
Robinson's chip. And a good header there by Big David.
And he had a great engine. He could get up and down the park. He was tall, he was good in the air.
Richie.
That short montage probably a decent encapsulation of how average Bristol City were, whilst maintaining a credible week-in, week-out performance to ensure they weren't dragged into much of a relegation battle. Yes, not much of an improvement in the standings, an identical record, but 7 losses from their final 11 games spoke to a season fizzling out more than any real danger.
Richie. Giles. That's for Giles. A good nod down. And it's there. Atlanta's missed Kings on Bristol City. Oh, what a finish.
The 1978-79 campaign was even better. They won 4 more games, grabbed 5 more points, and whilst they suffered the same lower tier pitfalls in the Cup to second division opposition this time in Crystal Palace, there was an air of City becoming top flight furniture in the kindest possible way. The homes of cup winners of the immediate past and future were won at Ipswich and Man United, while home form took care of teams as good as future European champions Aston Villa, recent FA Cup winners Southampton, as well as the perpetual champions of Liverpool. And so it should have. Bristol Cities were paid only less than the champions in this era, as they finished higher than they had done since they reached the cup final in 1909. Terry Cooper had added vast experience, but both he and Norman Hunter were gone ahead of the 1979-80 campaign. Meanwhile, Gary Collier was simply allowed to leave for Coventry, despite over 200 appearances at centre-half. Any fears that should have given the club a washed away with a facade that was a club record signing. Tony Fitzpatrick from St Mirren for $250,000. Complacency was here to stay.
Their young centre-half Paul Miller, his first league goal, and what a good run it was there, following in Ricky Villar's corner.
On for Robinson from Tuart, and Robinson puts it in.
Bristol City were actually cup finalists in the 1979-80 season, but even that in the mighty Anglo-Scottish Cup naturally was unattainable thanks to St Mirren inflicting revenge in that 2-legged final comprehensively. Only Brighton's 1 fewer game played was keeping Bristol City out of the drop zone when turkeys were being carved up on Christmas morning. The rot had long set in, and the Robins' failure to win between November 24th and February 19th killed them. A 5-2 hammering on the south coast at the Dell finally ended Bristol City's life as a top-flight club, which remains the case to this day. Little did we know, though, they were in free fall.
Now this is Hooks. Oh, he's made space. Masson arriving. That's it.
A lot of room in the second half. And a chance for Grim. Wallace is going to win the match for Forest.
That last clip we showed you there would be Bristol City's last day in the sun for quite some time now, and even that was a 5th round venture into the FA Cup. They still hadn't replaced Joe Royle. Season tickets had sharply dropped off a cliff, as did their bank balance, and after losing 1-0 to Swansea in September, Alan Dix departed. Bob Houghton was his replacement, a man who had guided Malmo to a European Cup final. He's said to have brought Swedish football into relevancy with his assistant Roy Hodgson. Results only temporarily improved. It was 3rd division quality football on 1st division wages as Jan Moller was brought in from Malmo for 100 grand, and he only added to Robin's financial woes.
Completely. And the referee's whistle brings to an end what was frankly a disappointing first half.
So it's Swindon playing left to right in the white shorts who get the West Country derby in motion.
They've not won as Graham.
These the only available matches to show you from Bristol City's 1981-82 season, and it pretty much just sums the whole thing up. Dull and lifeless as the inexorable plunging down the league ladder continued at pace. The introduction for 3 points for a win prompted City into the market for a £150,000 signing of Mick Harford from Newcastle. This despite being £700k in debt. Bristol City were the clowner of the early 1980s. Not even the transition from Horton to Hodgson in midway through the season could help matters, as he failed to see out the campaign, with the Robins weeks away from becoming the first club to have the honour of going from Divisions 1 to 4 in successive seasons. Young Luton Town took notes. By the 1982-83 season, the club continued to make headlines for all the wrong reasons. Now their sport was negotiating redundancy packages for overpaid players, as opposed to winning actual football matches. The Bristol Babes now had become a necessity. Only now they weren't challenging to become champions of England, but they had a fight on to get out of the English football basement. Terry Cooper returned and he would steady the ship, even if that ship was now 14th in the 4th Division. But let us end on a happy note.
Hit a low shot into the far corner of the net. Jan Orkley set up the winner, with 22-year-old university student Martin Hurst getting his geography right and finding the net.
For more football stories from the 1970s, why don't you click on this playlist right here.